Hello guys, welcome to this week's tutorial. My name is Steven Chris and this is another beginner JavaScript tutorial. And this week we are going to be looking at scopes or scoping, if you want to call it that way. And the general idea behind scoping is that variables are accessible from certain points in our code base, meaning that depending on where we declare our variable, we may or may not be able to access the value in that variable. A little bit of background is that before the introduction of there are three ways rather in which we can declare variables: var, const, and let, as earlier as we have earlier treated before. Now, before the introduction of let and const, it used to be solely var. At the beginning of JavaScript, it used to be solely var. What it meant is that we could only declare variables by using the keyword var. Now, in the long run, that posed a problem. When you declare a variable with var, there was a need to scope certain variables to certain aspects or certain code blocks. But when you declare variables with var, most of the time they are available everywhere in the code base. So what that means is that if you declare, and they are changeable as well. So if I declare a variable with var, I can easily change it, somewhere else. Now the problem with that is if I have a very large code base and I've declared a certain variable with var somewhere, I can change it anywhere else by mistake without knowing that I had changed the value of that variable, right? It is possible for me to write lines and lines of code and I've forgotten that at the top level, maybe in line 1 or in line 2 or in line 10, I had declared a variable with the same name, and that posed the problem. Thus, with the coming of ES6, there was introduction of let and const. Now, we've already treated let and const and what they are already, but in the context of scoping, we get to understand that when we declare variables using certain keywords, using const or let, or even var, we are restricted to the places where we have actually declared them. Now, that's a basic understanding. So we can let's just implement this with code and see what pops. Okay. Now, there are three methods there are three ways to look at scoping, right? What I have just explained now with var is the global scope. The global scope is that the code is available everywhere. So if we declare a variable at the global scope, it means that it is, you can think of it as the top level. So it means that it is at the top and we can access what is at the top easily or change its value easily, right? That's that. So this var, my name equals to Steven, is currently at the global scope, right? Now, the next that we're going to look at, which is where the critical work begins, is function scope. Now, with function scope, the idea behind function scope is that our variables are only available within the function in which they are declared, right? So if I say, for instance, function say my name, let's do that. All right, and then I will show you guys one thing. Yeah, if I say console.log, and then let's just say my name, right? Remember, I had already declared my name here with var, right? But before we do that, what I'm now going to do is that I'm going to say let your name equals to Paul, right? Equals to Paul, right? Now I'm going to try something here. I'm also going to log to the console.log, right? Your name. I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to try to log your name outside of the function, so you can just get understanding, right? Now you see that. Now what should happen is that when we log my name within this function, we should be able to get it, all right, because one is declared with var and it's at the global scope, so we should be able to find it, right? But we should not be able to log your name outside of this place. And you just see it, all right? I'm going to comment this out first, your name within the block, so we can easily understand it. So if I come to my terminal, I move my terminal to the right this time around, so we don't have to be switching between this. So you say node.js, right? And we should get some warning, right? You see that? So it says console.log your name. It says your name is not defined. So you see, it says your name is not defined, right? But that's not true, because we declared your name inside of Paul, right? We declared it inside of the function, rather. We declared inside of the function say my name, just to exemplify what I had said before, right? Sorry. Right. Okay. And all that stuff, right? Now, so if I comment this out and then do this, and let's just check the terminal one more time. I'll say node app.js console. Oh, we didn't call the function, sorry. Let's do say my name. Good. So if we do console say node app.js, so you see we get Steven and we get Paul, right? So we got the one that is outside. All right, we got the one that is outside. Okay, so you get that, right? But we cannot get the one that is inside, right? Let's try this now. See it? We get Paul, which is the name that is declared inside of the function, rather, and then we are not able to get your name from outside of the function. You know why it says your name is not defined? So it cannot find your name. Why? Because this function starts and ends within this function block. That's the whole idea with scoping, with function scope, right? This function, your name, only exists inside of this, this variable your name only exists inside of this function. It only exists inside of this function, right? And we cannot access it outside of that function. That's the whole idea behind function scope. All right, so moving on, the next one we're going to look at is lexical scope. Okay, let me just clear my terminal so we can see clearly. Okay, now lexical scope. What's the idea behind lexical scope? So the idea behind lexical scope is that functions are able to receive or access, rather, they are able to access functions that are declared within other functions. So think of it as parent and child functions. Right, remember that functions can hold anything, so they can also hold other functions within them. So let me just write the code and then explain it to you. All right, so I'll say function outer func, let's just call it like that. All right, then we're going to declare a variable and say let's outer var equal to outer, right? Then we'll write another function inside and say function inner function, right? And then we can then say console.log outer var. You see that? So what we have done here is that we have written a function inside of another function, right? And now we are now asking this function to access the value from outside of its function scope, right? So we are asking it to assign the value that is outside the function scope. So what happens is that we need to call this function first. So we're going to call inner func, right? And then we're going to call outer func. If you notice, see where I'm calling all of these functions, right? I called inner func inside of outer func, and then called outer func outside of outer func. You see that now? Okay, so if we just check our terminal and then say node app.js, you see it logs outer. Now let me show you something very interesting. right? Let me show you something very interesting. If I declare outer here, let outer var, right? Let's call it inner var, inner, or let's just call it inner, okay, for clarity, right? And now let's check this terminal again. You see, it goes for inner. So what happened here? What has just happened is that when we called that function, what the inner func does first is check within its function block for any variable that has for any variable with the name outer var. That's what it does. It checks within for any variable that has that for any variable with the name outer var. If it doesn't find it, it goes to the next level to go check. Right? It goes to the top level to go check, and if he sees it there, it calls that. So, and that's why if we comment this out now, and just with my function, you can see that when I uncomment this, this is no longer highlighted. When I comment this, this is now highlighted, so I can tell. Okay, so if you see now node app.js, we'll get outer again. You see that? So the whole idea behind lexical scope is that functions are able to access variables within that are outside of them but within other functions. Now a key thing to note is that this is a one-way journey, right? It's just from the child function, from the inner function to the outer function. The outer function cannot access the variable that is within the inner function. I will just exemplify that for you. Okay, so assuming that we call this inner, for example, inner var. Let's for what we want to do now call this inner var. All right, and then we come here and say console.log inner var. Right, and just by looking within my function, my inner func, you will notice that it's not highlighted. Again, it thanks to that extension. Okay, node.js. So if we check the terminal now, you should see that we should get an error that inner var is not defined. You see that inner var is not defined because the outer function cannot access the variable that is inside of the inner function. You see that? So in a nutshell, it's a one-way street. It's a one-way communication. It's the inner function who is able to access the variable that is that is outside of its function, but inside of another function. Okay, all right. So that's the whole idea behind lexical scope. Now, the last scope that we're going to look at is block scope. Now, the block scope is just like function scope, all right, but we're not using the function this time around. Now, the idea behind block scope is that functions exist only within the block of code in which they are declared. It's just that simple. It's just like function scope. Function scope variables start and end within the function in which they are declared. The same thing applies to block scope, right? Within that block in which you've declared them, that's where they are. That's where they are at. Okay, and I'll just show you guys. So assuming we have an array and we say let student names, right, equal to, and then we just have an array here, and it says Steven, and then another one James, and let's put a third one Ricky. Okay, and we do that. Now we want to loop through this array and then output the values that are there. So we're just going to say, okay, for now let I equals to 0. Note that this is a variable declaration. Now when I say I less than student names dot length, so the entirety of the student names, and then increment that with an I++. In a simple way, we're just going to say console.log student names I. Okay, now what have we done? obviously we've treated loops before, yeah. So if you know, if you've watched the previous tutorial where we treated loops, you understand what this says. So we have started by declaring a variable called I, and we set its initial, we set its value to 0, which is where our iteration should start, 0, right? All right, so that's a variable. Now the thing here is that we cannot access this I outside of here. I cannot come here and say console.log student I. Let's check the terminal. Let's check. Let's see if we're wrong. Sorry, clear the terminal first. Node app.js. Right. So you see, we get the first one from inside. Steven, James, and Ricky. Right. We get them from inside. But console.log student names I is not found. See, app.js is not found. Right. So it can't get it because I is not available outside of this block of code. I is not available outside of that block of code. It's not able to access that, right? Although it can access students. Again, note that student is currently at the global level. You see that? So if we log students, we get the entire array. But in the loop, we have said loop over them, right? In fact, let's make this different. Let's make this different so it's very interesting to us. Then plus is a student. Right, let's do it that way. Okay, so let's clear that and then say node app.js. Right, so you get Stephen is a student, James is a student, Ricky is a student. That shows you that that is the one within the for loop. All right, and then students is the entire array. So what we are logging here is the array, but here we are looping through and then outputting each value plus the text is a student. You see that? So block scope, right? I'm sorry, yeah, block scope is that, in a nutshell, is that the variable is accessible within the block of code that you're about to execute. In this case, a for loop. All right. Now, as a recap, we have looked at 3 or 4, ways of kinds of scope, right? We looked at the global scope, which we say generally is the code that is available in the entire code base. Okay. Now, and then we looked at function scope, which is that the variable declared within a function starts and dies within that function. It's not accessible outside of it, right? Then we looked at lexical scope, through which we understand that a variable inside a function inside another a function inside a function within another function is able to access the variable within that outer function. All right, parent and child. So you can look at it as parent and child. So the child function is able to access variables that are within its parent function. That's the basic way to understand it. Okay, so I don't confuse you guys. These things, they can be quite confusing sometimes. All right. Then we looked at block scoping, which tells us that functions also start and end within the code block in which we are trying to execute. So for loops and other examples and all that stuff. So this will be the end of this video. Please don't forget to like. All right, please don't forget to comment. Please don't forget to share, subscribe to the channel so that we can grow, so that I can grow the channel, so that I can keep putting out wonderful content for you guys. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I will be readily happy to answer your questions. Once again, my name is Steven Chris. See you guys in the next video. Bye bye.